Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to another video for Europa Universalis IV as I continue my Tools Moan. Today we're going to look at Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, which in 1444, they start in a giant personal union in which Denmark wears the daddy pants, which means Denmark gets to call all the shots right now, up until the point where there may be a little bit of a war for independence. So as a player, you have a lot of potential to do some pretty crazy stuff. You can certainly find ways to officially annex Sweden. So the way it works, there's like one king right now, but he's the king of all the things. And so you can use that influence to really combine your nations. They're separate nations, even though there's just one king. But it really depends on what happens and if you play, and especially what the AI does. It's quite interesting when you're playing one of the other nations to see what happens over here. Of course, in my England game, Denmark annexed Sweden, whereas if I'm recalling correctly, in my Muscovy game, Sweden declared independence, then went and basically took over all the things. So it was nice to actually see both variants of that happening. So we're going to take a look at some of the national ideas kicking around here. We'll start from the right-hand side. So this is in 1444. Force limit. We are at 14 of 14, which is not a tremendously high force limit. We're at 18 of 21 for our Navy. Now, 18 ships is pretty decent. Unfortunately, only 3 of them are heavy ships. A lot of galleys. And we do have a slight light fleet here, and this is for our trade. Our control of trade routes. So not the world's most terrifying fleet, especially given how many islands and water crossings we have going on. If we do get in a war with someone who happens to have a lot of ships, for example, if we happen to get into one of the Hansa, which has a pretty good navy, and if they're in here blockading our land, well, one, being blockaded is horrible for war score. It's just brutal to be on the bad end of that. But the other thing means it's also hard to shuffle your units around through these sort of water connections, right? These dotted lines, so we can move our units from here to here, for example. But I believe if the Hansa, if we were at war with the Hansa and they moved their ships into Lolland here, we would be kind of screwed. We wouldn't be able to move our troops. And could you imagine a situation where our troops were just pinned on this island here while our opponents were running roughshod over the rest of our territory? Not entirely a good thing. So, you know, Denmark is in a really interesting position because it's not very big. It is a tiny nation. In a sense. I mean, it does have a handful of provinces that, you know, they're physically small on the map, but the fact that it has a decent number of provinces isn't bad. But, you know, you're not necessarily in the most secure position, especially if somehow these guys are able to fight you off for independence. Let's take a look at our political situation in case we've got any alliances. I actually had not checked that. Personal union with Denmark. Yes. Wait. Are we not? Oh, I was looking at the wrong nation. That's the problem. Sorry. Diplomacy, view my country. There we go. Personal unions with Sweden and Norway. And we have a vassal in Holstein. All right. And a CB on Holstein. That's quite interesting. Now, whether we'd want to go to war with our vassal is a whole other question. Obviously, this area has been quite politically charged in the past. If I recall my history correctly, it is partially Denmark's attempt to take control of more land here, or actually the whole north coast here, like Pomerania and all that, that led to some of the strife with Sweden wanting to get independence. I think Sweden was trying to trade with these guys, and Denmark kept like messing that up for them. So all kinds of factors like that. And then eventually some guy named Vasa showed up, threw off the, you know, declared independence, and then later they named a ship after him, and then later that thing sank after like 1 nautical mile. It was like the grandest ship in the entire Swedish fleet that has ever been constructed, and it just fell into the water and sank. So that's pretty funny. Let's go back to looking at our actual stuff over here. We do start off Catholic. We have complete religious unity at this point in history. We do have some rebels. Oh, rebels actively going on over here in Gotland, which is very interesting. They actually want install Eric I on the throne of Denmark. Really? I wonder what happens if they succeed at that. We actually start with -1 stability, which is quite brutal, actually. Luckily, we have no chance of rebellion anywhere else at this point, which is good. But you want to get your stability up as quickly as possible because it hurts your tax income. Okay, apparently it doesn't give you a penalty to your tax income. But more importantly, having positive stability gives you more tax income. So it tends to be a pretty high priority to do. Missions we can start with. Fortify Blekinge. Oh man, like I can't pronounce most provinces on a good day, and like the sort of Scandi stuff, god damn it, there's just no hope. Improve relations with Oldenburg, save the Danish people in Schleswig. Yeah, So my apologies. We also have the option of forming a Scandinavian nation. It does need admin tech level 10, which is pretty typical. And we would need control over Stockholm, Västergötland, Akershus, and then some cores, right? So that is here, here, and what else? I don't know where Västergötland. Where's that? Oh, right here, right in front of my face. Okay. So in terms of distance, not that terribly far. Here, here, and here. The big problem is that how are you going to get that without, you either have to find some way to diplomatically annex your vassals or break that personal union in some way and go to war with them to grab these sort of areas diplomatically or aggressively. Now, I've not actually played a game as Denmark, so I'm not sure which way is the easiest way to do that. But that's your immediate goal, and forming Scandinavia would certainly be very, very cool. Although at that point, you are going to have to contend with maybe a possibly formed Russia, and obviously there's lots of room for some controversy over here because we've got cores by, not that much actually. I was expecting other nations to have cores over here. But, there's always room for the HRE kind of turning into a big poo-poo head. So, national ideas. What do we start with? 5% better national trade income, which is good. We'll have to look at trade routes in a second. And 10% cheaper ship costs, which is great. Although, of course, we are at our force limit for ships, unfortunately. Now, we can go over that. It just starts to cost a lot more money. Our possible ideas, 15% faster manpower recovery, plus 1 yearly naval tradition, which would actually be very, very nice. 10% extra national tax modifier, which is beautiful. Although with Muscovy, you'd start with it as you're in a first slot, so it's certainly a lot slower there. 33% less naval maintenance. So again, in Denmark, you really are encouraged to keep a huge fleet. Greatly improved naval force limit. Again, keep a huge fleet, and this will really enable you to do that. I mean, effectively, this translates to much, much cheaper ships maintenance, much like this does, because being over your force limit translates to that. Reduced national revolt risk, all right. Decreased national cost modifier, which is good. Tolerance of the true faith being improved. That's religious freedom is atheism. That's really interesting. So that means a greatly reduced revolt chance anywhere where you have the faith of, like, your main faith of your country. Right now it's Catholic, but if you were to flip to Protestants later on, so that would convert over to that. And then if we complete the whole thing, then we get 15% more effective light ships, which is certainly very nice. Technology levels, we are in the Western Tech Group. Everything else is very standard, start at 3 all the way across. Trade screen, economy. So right now, while we're not making a whole lot of money, if we were able to get our stability positive, our taxation money would go up dramatically. What surprises me, we don't make a whole lot of money from trade. So let's take a look at the actual trade routes that are going on here. Can I zoom out? So we've got the Lubeck trade zone is what we're a real member of. And obviously there's going to be a lot of contention here, I feel. Now, 100% of the trade is currently being retained, which is good for us because that's what we're trying to do. Like the Hansa is here, and they have a lot of trade power. Now, at this point, we don't have our ships out there patrolling the trade route, although neither do the Hansa. So I think that this is going to stay relatively samey. So finding ways to increase your trade power, I think, would actually be quite stupendous. We also have a trader in the Baltic Sea, which is over here, yeah. And this is forwarding more trade over to Lubeck over here. Now, we don't appear to have, we don't have any actual provinces in this trade zone. Now, if we do manage to take over Sweden, then we will have a dramatic amount of influence there, which will be great, so we can forward more and more trade over here. So the trade fleet, it'll be an interesting decision whether you want to patrol here to gain a bigger slice of the pie in Lubeck, or if you want to patrol the Baltic Sea to forward more pie to Lubeck, if I'm going to, sort of wear out that particular analogy. Oh, and what kind of king do you start with? 322, not fantastic, and no air currently, which is kind of interesting and awkward. So we're going to pop out of here. We're going to take a look at Sweden. Now, what were our idea group called? Danish idea. I suspect that each one of these nations will have a different tech group. But it's possible not, because to a certain extent, I believe they're shared based on culture. But I'm pretty sure, yeah, they all have a different culture. But there are some nations that share their that share their ideas, especially some of the less, developed ones, the nations that aren't quite major. But you bet, like, Paradox being a Swedish developer, I guarantee that all these are fleshed out pretty good. So we've talked a lot about the initial circumstances with Sweden, of course. We're going to take a look at the diplomacy screen first of all. We're in that personal union. We have some CBs on both Denmark and Norway, including an independence CB on Denmark. So the big problem is we do start with considerably fewer units. Our force limit is slightly lower. I think Denmark was 14. So we're at 13. We're not even maxed out there. 14, because they're actually maxed out and everything. So we would have to build the army to start off with. Furthermore, if we were to try to declare independence, there's a good chance that Norway would still be in the personal union with Denmark, which means we'd also have to fight Norway off at the same time. So getting that initial independence battle won is going to be super high priority, I think. It wouldn't surprise me. Just improve relations, but I'm hoping there's a mission at some point for that. Now, you don't want to rush it. You're going to want to time it. You want to do it as soon as possible, but no sooner, which, I don't know, it's a bit of a tautology there or something. Because, yeah, obviously that would be really good. And then, of course, if you can take over all of Scandinavia, that would be fantastic. Because, forming Scandinavia, I didn't actually look at what the benefit was. More revolt risk, but 10% extra tax modifier is stupendously good. And all Scandinavian cultures give no penalties. So I guess that would mean that we can actually look at the culture group. Swedish, Finnish, Danish, and Norwegian. So there's the Swedish or the Finnish culture over here. Let me find the culture thing. Right? Finnish over here. So anything that falls under those three cultures would have no penalties whatsoever. Now at the start, I believe the Finnish culture is accepted, and it is. It's not your culture, but it's accepted, which means you're pretty much going to be okay for rebellions. But there's always the potential of having some problems going forward. Yeah, breaking a union. Junior partner can use the independence CB to attempt to break free. They will proclaim a king of their own and then have to win a war against the union leader. They must win the war to break free. White peace will not be enough. And I suspect it will probably be various like semi-random events to try to encourage that sort of thing to happen. But I have not played Sweden, so I can't really judge it. Religion, pretty samey. Stability, we at least start at 0, but again, you want to go up pretty quickly. Let's see the missions. Ideas. So 25% cheaper mercenary maintenance. And that's interesting. I don't tend to make use of a lot of mercenaries in these games, but it might not be a terrible idea. Now, the thing to note about mercenaries is that they still count against your force limit. And their maintenance tends to be quite high. So if you're using them to go above a force limit, you're going to be in a pretty rough situation. They're also a bit more expensive to hire. On the other hand, they hire relatively quickly, and they don't use your manpower to hire them. So Sweden, which may not have a tremendous amount of manpower available to itself, once it maxes out its army, may indeed look into picking up some mercenaries. And the fact that your mercenaries are already cheaper to maintain might encourage you to pick up the Administrative Ideas Tech Group, which makes your mercenaries cheaper to hire, much cheaper to maintain, more of them available, and so on and so forth. I think, well, I say so on and so forth, but I guess that's about it. There are a few more. Here we go. Cheaper mercenary costs over here in Innovative Ideas, which is actually a pretty nice tree altogether. So, that might be a viable strategy. I don't know. We also get a significant bonus to our infantry combat skill. Like, huge. Wow. And eventually we can get +1 leader shock, and then other ideas are +1 legitimacy every year, which will be, we start with very high legitimacy at this time, but that will pretty much encourage you or enable you to keep a maxed out legitimacy all the time. Maybe you're going to flip this thing around later on and become the person who creates all the personal unions and inherits thrones. Plus 10% discipline for Swedish steel. That is very strong. Discipline translates to extra damage in combat. Once you get to this level, your troops are going to be significantly better than Denmark, because Denmark didn't have anything that increased discipline. And we'll have to take a look at what Norway does, but that is pretty potent. The Hakapolita, these, I believe, they're Finnish originally, but Sweden would use them in the War of Independence historically, if I recall that correctly. It does lead to cheaper cavalry costs. Now, it is unfortunate that doesn't stack very well with your infantry combat ability bonus. On the other hand, I think it's still, you're still going to want that 50-50 split, or damn nearly so, for your cavalry. You may want to keep a 60-40, just to, again, make sure if you lose any infantry, you don't suddenly get the out-of-supply penalty. And again, some people, the tooltip here is not clear. It actually is very misleading. It's as long as your cavalry is not more than 50% of your infantry plus cavalry put together. The artillery doesn't matter. So early on, when you don't have any artillery, it simply means your cavalry can't be more than 50% of your entire army. And later on, when you get infantry, artillery, you just don't count those. So you could have something like 5, and then 100 artillery or 0 artillery. It doesn't make a difference for that particular modifier. So you probably still want to run about 50% cav in general because it's pretty strong. Decreased stability cost, which is nice. Plus 10% production efficiency, so there's a little bit more money there. And 10% more manpower. It does come quite late in the game. I think at that point you've pretty much established yourself one way or another, but it certainly never hurts. Technology, we are Western, not much to talk about there. 3 across the board. Initial trade situation. Money, we're actually getting quite a bit more from production than we are from taxation. Why are we getting 0 taxation? Oh, that's 0% bonus to our taxation modifiers. Okay, that's what that means there. Overall, we're actually in a pretty good position for making money at this point. We've actually got a half-decent fleet. Not terrible. Less than Denmark, and I think that would be one of the things to win a war against Denmark really effectively, would be if we could somehow come at them with more heavy ships. That would be pretty freaking impressive. Diplomatic situation, yep, that's fine. And our king, I think we already looked at 322. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the screens. Trade situation, take a quick look here. So we are almost certainly trading in, the Baltic Sea, and Novgorod, where we're trying to forward some ability forward. Now, we are retaining, most of the trade is being retained, but not all of it. And while we are at the top, it looks like we have the bigger slice, but no, I guess the Teutonic Order does. We're getting a fair amount of trade out of this zone, but we could definitely squeeze out a little bit more. And it wouldn't be, well, no, we'd have to take over land down here if we wanted to get more trade power in this zone, which I think would be quite difficult. And I think that if we did end up conquering Denmark, we'd end up in that awkward problem like we have with London, where Lübeck is downstream from us, so we wouldn't actually be in a very good position to collect trade here. I guess the exception might be if we moved our capital out of Stockholm and put it somewhere in this trade zone, and then we would keep moving things downstream, Novgorod to the Baltic Sea to Lübeck. All right, let's pop out of here and take a quick look at the North Sea at Norway. Exit to menu. Yes. Okay. And just take a look at their ideas mostly, because the situation overall is going to be pretty samey to the rest of Scandinavia. Single player, Norway. Play. Actually, just very quickly, when do they maybe get broken out of the personal union? Hold on. That didn't take long. Wow, okay, so in the 1453 start, Sweden is already independent. It really does not take very long for that to happen. Norway is still in personal union, independent in 1579. So if you do want to play these nations and you want to start them off independently, there's one way to do it. But we're going to drop to 1444 again and load up Norway. So I suspect that Norway is in a much worse position to declare independence. It certainly starts with fewer troops than Sweden. And the force limit is very, very, very low. So I suspect they'd probably be very, very hard to play as a human player. I mean, that being said, starting as the lesser member of a personal union is not the end of the world, but it does decrease your options. You really just have less stuff that you can do. Like you can't declare war on your own. That's actually the big thing. The only thing you can declare war on is the person at the head of your personal union. Now, the War of Independence is actually a relatively easy one to fight in a sense. I forgot about that because your job, your main goal is to simply keep your capital. You will get a ticking war score on your side as long as you hold your capital. So it is a purely defensive war. You can stretch it out. You can fortify your border and you're fighting on your own land. You can position yourself across rivers. You can position yourself on hilly terrain. A lot of these are quite hilly and mountainous, for example. So as Norway, you would start with fewer troops, but you might be in a good position to actually hold off Denmark for a fairly decent amount of time. Now, I don't think you'd want to do it on day one, but you could build to it relatively quickly. And then the longer you hold your capital, the more war score you're going to get. And hopefully at some point, they're just going to have to give up on you and say, fine, you can be independent. Which is a very fun and I think sensible mechanic. It doesn't make sense that, Norway or Sweden, or, later on, for example, if you play the start and you want to, play as the colonies over here, Well, it doesn't quite work that way, but I suppose if you're playing as England and you settle over here and the US starts to split off, they don't have to come over and sack London to be independent. They just have to hold on to their capital, their territory, and eventually you're just going to have to relent and say, fine, there's nothing we can do about it. Religion, samey. So, starting missions, fortify Jämtland. Because we don't have any forts in some of our provinces. So right over here, it's got like just level 1 fort. It's got basically nothing, so we'd have to increase it to an earthen rampart. I don't think I looked at the missions for Sweden, actually. Improve relations with Sweden, fortify, and it's the same thing. Get the earth rampart going on there. And I think all the missions are pretty samey here as well. Our national ideas. We start off with much cheaper light ship costs and much improved light ship combat ability. I like that quite a bit. Now, just like with the cavalry versus infantry choice, each ship will factor into your force limit, your naval force limit. So the big heavy ships tend to be better on a pound for pound, or rather force limit for force limit modifier. But this is a hell of a lot of extra power to the light ships. I don't know how they compare in combat side by side. We can go here. So number of cannons. So that's barks. Okay, so the early carracks are 4 times as powerful as the barks in terms of actual cannon ability, and have a lot more hull size as well, which I believe mostly controls their like hit points and things. I think that's how that factors in. On the other hand, the barks have a lot of speed, so I think that helps with the maneuver in combat, which is a thing. Again, I'm not 100% on the naval mechanics, so I'm probably lying to you guys in about 30 different ways. That being said, I do like the fact that you also get the extra trade steering. Oh, that's when you get all the ideas. Okay, so you can become a pretty significant trade powerhouse later on. It'd be interesting to see if these ideas change once you form Scandinavia, or if you keep them. So if you're looking to form Scandinavia, you might decide Denmark versus Sweden versus Norway based on their ideas. The other idea is 10% extra production efficiency, very good for extra money. Much improved morale of the navies, which is going to be quite potent. Reduced ship cost even more, so yeah, you're mostly going to do the naval thing. Increased colonial range, which is quite interesting, because Norway, I don't think you're in a position to necessarily rush North American colonialism. On the other hand, you do start with a little chunk of ice over here. And that is a pretty nice jumping off point from here to Greenland to the continent. And I wondered, like, as a lesser member in this personal union, are you still able to do all the colonial stuff? It might be really interesting to just accept that you're under Denmark and play a very different style of game. I'm actually really curious about that. I'll have to check that out. Call of our Forefathers would give us, that's the colonial range. Pioneer Spirit, +1 colonist. Well, there you go. You're going to be playing that game. 10% extra global trade power, which again is going to be very, very nice once you do get the trade nodes rocking in the Americas. I mean, mostly North America as Norway, obviously. And much more yearly prestige, and the discipline bonus is nothing to sneeze at either. Tech level, we are completely standard for a Western power. Trade screen economy. Economy's not great. I mean, let's just say that. We're not getting very much in the way of trade at all. We are in the North Sea trade zone mostly, and a little bit in Lübeck. In fact, our capital, this is our capital, is technically in Lübeck. Well, that's not so bad, actually, because, we can steer. We've got a fair amount of trade power over here to allow us to steer trade over to Lübeck, where we're going to collect the money. And that's not terrible. However, you are running into a tremendous risk of having England try to influence the North Sea trade route. I think your biggest benefit here is the fact that this is not worth very much. On the other hand, it also means it's not worth very much to you to steer the trade over here, which is kind of unfortunate. And you don't have a lot of trade power here in Lübeck either. You can see Norway is way down here, not collecting a tremendous amount of funds. Still, you might be able to start doing something with a bunch of light ships. The North Sea trade route will start to be worth tremendously more once North America is colonized, because we can route all kinds of goods up towards the north, although I think you will be competing with some of the other trade routes as well. What's left for the screens? The diplomacy screen, we've got nothing going on other than our relationship with Denmark. And our ruler is a 322. I think that's pretty samey to all the other Scandinavian... That's why it's the same as all the Scandinavian rulers. It's the same king, right? That's the very nature of a personal union. We literally all have the same king. Yeah, I'm good at this. All right. Derp, derp. No legal heir. That's interesting. I don't know if that has any implications for us, if he were to happen to die without a legal heir. Huh. Anyway, that brings me to the end of our look at the Scandinavian nations, and I think we will come back here because I know there's some people that have some questions about the nations in sort of Eastern Europe, and then we will take a look at the HRE, I think, as our final glance, and maybe we'll look at Portugal in terms of colonialism. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.